Welcome to Living Piano TV. I'm Robert Estrin, your host. Today is a very important show. It's the first of a three-part series on how to practice the piano. Today's show focuses on how to memorize music, something that I learned from my very first lesson with my father, Morton Estrin. Such a great teacher, I never realized how unusual it was that I could memorize music until much later in my life when I went to the Manhattan School of Music and discovered that other accomplished pianists had no idea how to memorize. And I ended up teaching many of my fellow students what you're going to learn today. Well, before I get into it, I want to talk about why memorization is such intrinsic to the piano. If you think about almost any instrument, basic tone production on the piano is about as easy as any instrument can possibly be. Even a very young child can go to a piano and get a reasonably good sound the first time they try. Try that on an oboe or a flute. Just getting a sound out is hard. It could take years to even get the right position on the violin. What makes the piano so challenging is the complexity of the music. And yeah, it really helps to be able to look at your hands, and page turns are a problem, and just being able to see all the notes is sometimes just impossible. So memorization is a fact of life for pianists, that is for classical pianists. So, how to memorize music? Well, I'm going to tell you a little story. Just imagine there's a pile of bricks in your front yard and you need to move them to your backyard. And it's on a tarp. So you could go there and tug on that tarp really hard and maybe you move it a couple of inches, and you could do that a couple of times, and you know what? Before you know it, your back is really sore and you probably quit because it's just too hard. Well, the secret would be to take maybe a brick in each hand, walk to the backyard with it, and, go back to the front yard, take another couple of bricks, walk them to the back. It might take you several hours, but before you know it, that pile of bricks that was in the front yard is going to be in the backyard. Well, that's the secret of memorizing music. You take a very small amount at a time, and before you know it, you have more than a pile of bricks, boy, I can tell you that. So how do you do this? Well, it's really a 5-step process. In a nutshell, you learn a very small section, right hand alone, then you memorize it. You learn the left hand alone, memorize that. Make sure they're thoroughly memorized before the third step, which is the hardest step, putting the hands together. Then you get that memorized. Go on to the next section the same way. That's the fourth step. And finally, connect from the beginning. Voila, 5 steps. Now, I'm going to break it down a little further for you. Within those 5 steps, there are additional 5 steps. Now, no, don't worry. It's not that complicated. When you're memorizing, there are not really steps, but 5 facets you must take into account when you're learning. The notes, obviously. The rhythm, which you want to count out loud to be certain you're learning it correctly. The fingering, which is written in the score, or if you're a more advanced student, figuring out an appropriate fingering for the passage. The phrasing, the ways in which notes are connected or detached, very important. And finally, the expression, which is everything else, the dynamics and the words that are written to get slower or faster, anything like that. Now, I know sometimes people will say to me, well, I want to put the expression in later, or I'll put the dynamics in later. Well, there's a fallacy to that thinking, which is you're going to be playing at some dynamic level. So if you're playing the wrong dynamic level, later you're going to have to unlearn what you learned wrong. Now, this is why this method of practice is so incredibly efficient. Because if you've ever learned something wrong, you know how incredibly difficult it is to unlearn it. I had a teacher at the Manhattan School of Music, Constance Keene, who used to say, take a piece of paper and crease it. And she put a piece of paper in my hand and I creased it. And she said, now try to get the crease out. And try as I might, it's impossible. And so it is when you learn something wrong on the piano. It's darn near impossible to undo mistakes. The secret of this type of practice is that you never allow yourself to learn anything wrong because you keep it incredibly simple. For example, let's say you were learning the famous C major sonata of Mozart, Kurso 545. Well, that is probably a sufficient amount to learn, or even half that amount. So let's say you were taking even half that amount. You could certainly learn. You might do it slower at first, but it shouldn't take you more than a minute to learn that. Am I right? Then, of course, you want to look at the notes, rhythm, fingering, phrasing, and expression. Watch your slurs, look at the dynamic, the tempo marking, all of that. Be certain it's right. Double, triple, quadruple check your work like a pilot in a plane. Even Joe just came from the hangar and all the crew just checked everything out. He's still out there looking at the right rudder, left rudder, flaps. He's checking it again because in this case, lives are at stake. Well, your time is at stake in your practice and your time is valuable. So you want to double and triple check your work to make sure that you're not going to have a mistake ingrained. So you take that, you memorize it. The left hand, you could actually first learn it in chords, which I always recommend. That way you'll find a good fingering, plus you can understand the harmonies more easily. Then memorize those chords first, then break it up as it's written. Get that memorized. It shouldn't take you more than a minute to do that. Then put the hands together. This is the hardest part. This is why you want to spend the time hands separately, perfecting, making sure it's comfortable, up to tempo, and you can play it many times in a row accurately before you ever attempt to put the hands together. And here's what I'm going to ask of you. When you put the hands together, try to do it from memory the very first time. Very important. And go very slowly. That is the most important thing. It will make you think. You must think it through. Now, if you get to a point where you're stuck, of course, refer to the score again. Go back and forth until you can play that phrase perfectly from memory. Once you've done that, you go on to the next small section. The size of the section depends upon the complexity of the piece, but the rule is every one of these steps should take you not much more than a minute. If it takes you much more than a minute, then you're taking too much at a time. Take a small enough section where it'll take you a minute or two to learn the right hand. You learn the notes, the rhythm, the fingering, the phrasing, the expression. Each of those takes probably less than a minute. And then playing it a few times, and by being thorough in that, you'll be able to get the hands together from memory. Finally, you get that, you learn the next section, then go back to the beginning and put them together. You may need to use the score to check your work and see how the phrases connect. Many times, it's good to go to one note beyond a phrase so the connection is kind of already there, like a jigsaw puzzle all pieced together. And you'll be surprised at how quickly you can memorize a piece. Because if you just read through a piece over and over again, missing it again and again and again, hoping that eventually you're going to get it, there's a real fallacy to that. It's really anti-practicing because you've missed it so much. Now you've learned, ingrained how to play it wrong. And this is why it's so necessary to break it down to its component parts so you can move that pile of bricks into your head and have a piece of music to show for it. All right? So that is the secrets of memorization. Next time, we have the secrets of sight reading. And I'm going to tell you a personal story about that. So join the next Living Piano How to Practice series. Thanks for joining, and please leave comments. I welcome them, and any shows you're interested in, I will do just for you. See you next time.